Welcome to the last CERIAS security seminar for the semester. And my name is Ibrahim Bagili, and I'm going to be your presenter for today. Today you're going to hear a topic that is a little more social scientifically oriented when compared to the other topics that you hear in this class. I'm going to be talking about anonymity and how anonymity should be extended to high-tech white-collar crime and the IT insider threat. So just by a show of hands, who's ever done anything and they wanted to be anonymous while they were doing it? Come on. Yeah, some of you are not paying attention, or they're not really being honest here, right? Who's ever driven in an area where they knew there were no cops? So that they don't, yeah. So we all do these things, and it's just part of being human. So the purpose of this presentation is the following, okay? I want to motivate students in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields to engage themselves in more social, scientific-oriented work. Okay, my background, by the way, is in telecommunications and networking technology and in programming. But then I took on this extra effort to try to understand all this social science stuff. And also to inspire you to pursue some research in that area. And finally, I want to illustrate the importance of research in that area. So to do that, let's have a look at this. These are going to be the topics that I'm going to discuss. I'm going to discuss why should we talk about humans? Why should we talk about psychology? I'm going to discuss some background info on anonymity and anonymity in computer-mediated communications. I'm going to talk about cybercrime, but in specific, I'm going to limit my discussion to white-collar crime or high-tech white-collar crime and the IT insider threat. And then we're going to move on to see what can we do with this info and some conclusions. So why social science? Who invented the computer? Was it humans or aliens? Humans. Can a computer exist by itself? Deepak, can a computer exist by itself? No. Someone needs to operate the computer, right? Who performs the attack? The computer? How can it be the computer? Who wrote that malicious code that's going to run on that computer to perform the attack by itself? Even if it's artificial intelligence. It's a human at the end of the day. Right? So there's too much research on this technical side. Okay, we all do research on authentication, authorization, encryption, decryption, but are we really looking at this stuff? That's a good question to ask. So anonymity. Let's go back to the Greek world, right? Anonymity is actually anonymous, and those are the Greek letters. They look kind of cool. And it's the state of being anonymity is not having a name. That's the original meaning of anonymity. Is if something doesn't have a name, then it's anonymous. And then the definition started changing. So that's another definition there. With the rise of computing, this whole concept of pseudonymity came along, which means that you're using a false name. For example, if you're chatting online but not using your real name, then that's pseudonymity. And with the rise of the internet, 4 types of anonymity and pseudonymity came about. Traceable and untraceable. That simply means that if it's traceable, I can trace it back to the sender. Okay? And in pseudonymity terms, I can trace back your fake name. Okay? So if your fake name is Rogers, okay, or if your fake name is Justin, I can trace back that message to Justin. Untraceable means that you can't trace it back to the origin, whether it's pseudonymity or anonymity. So we just looked at 2 ways, actually 3 different definitions of anonymity, right? We looked at without a name, we looked at Frumkin's definition, and here's another model that was proposed as well. Another model is looking at anonymity in layers, going from visual anonymity to disassociation of identity, which means that I'm not giving you my true identity, to the lack of identification, which is very similar to what? Untraceable, right? That means I can't trace who you are. So what? I just presented you, I gave you a quick overview of different definitions of anonymity, and I gave you different models. So we have different definitions, right? We have different models. Come in. And it's starting to become highly associated with what? Computing, right? Above all that, with all that said, it's also associated with culture. Research is indicating that based on your culture, your perception of anonymity is different. All right? Westerners are more likely to gravitate towards concepts with lower levels of anonymity. Easterners seek online activities with higher levels of anonymity. What does that mean? Who can tell me why that exists? Who can see the reasoning behind that? Can anyone tell me? Yes? Yes, in a global sense. Not like East and West Indiana. I'm looking at the global sense. Well, no, I'm looking at in global sense. That's a good question. So who can tell me why that's the case? Yes?
Well, in China, there have been people persecuted for their beliefs, expression, speech.
Possibly, but the reasoning behind this actual research was something different. What's the major difference between an Eastern culture and a Western culture? One is individualistic, the other one is, which means what? They work in groups. They work in groups, right? I'm from the Middle East, we work in groups. That actually influences your perception of anonymity. Okay? Because if you don't want to show that you're part of a certain group, then what are you going to do? Or if you want to show that you're part of a group, then you're more willing to convey that information, right? So now we move on. We talked about anonymity. We talked about there's different definitions, so there are problems with the definitions. Now we're going to move on to how anonymity affects behavior. Now, Gustave Le Bon is actually a French writer, and he published this work in 1895 in a book called The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. And he was one of the first people to say that if you are submerged in a group, you're going to feel that you're more anonymous. How does that work? Who's ever been to a concert with a lot of people? Okay? Did you feel anonymous there, that you didn't know anyone, you're just seeing all these people, and you might do something crazy, right? Gustave Le Bon stated that. And that is called a de-individuation state. Okay? When you are de-individuated, that means what? That means you lose your sense of individuality. Now, Gustave Le Bon had something called the crowd theory. Festinger in 1952 explained it differently. He says that if you're submerged into a group, you lose your individuality because you're being part of a group. But the reason why you act differently is because it decreases your internal individual restraints of moral controls. What does that mean? That personally, I have what? I have restraints inside of me. Okay? Any person has restraints. And if you're in a group, these restraints are going to be decreased. Therefore, I'm going to act a different way than I would normally act. So now we've seen two theories on de-individuation. Right? Here's another one. Here's a big one. Zimbardo. Okay? Zimbardo's theory is more objective. His studies, and actually the interesting thing about Zimbardo is now we're talking about cybercrime. This whole thing is going to lead to cybercrime. Zimbardo focused on behaviors called de-individuated behaviors. He basically stated that if you are de-individuated, you are going to perform behaviors that are antisocial. Okay, and hacking and all these things are regarded antisocial, right? But his theory stated that there are specific antecedent variables. things that need to happen before you get into that state. And they're listed over there. Anonymity is very important. Loss of individual responsibility, arousal, also known as excitement, sensory overload, unstructured situations, and mind-altering substances. Okay? So if you take, according to his theory, if you take a lot of drugs, for instance, you might what? Perform an antisocial behaviors. Or that might increase the chances of you doing that. So now we've seen how many theories? 3, right? Diener, in 1980, had another one. Individuals are submerged into a group. They're overloaded with information, which causes them to lose their objective self-awareness. Meaning that they have the assumption that as a human, I am self-aware of what I'm capable of doing, and also of what I should not do. Okay? And it allows them to lose their internalized self-standards. So this is a little bit similar to the theory that we just talked about a second ago. But their major difference is they said that environmental stimuli, or Diener's work said that environmental stimuli determine the outcome of that. Meaning that if I'm in an environment that promotes pro-social things, then I might perform good things, right? If I'm in an environment that promotes anti-social things, then what am I going to do? Laptop guys, what am I going to do? This is interesting. Pay attention. Stop performing antisocial behaviors. Okay? So, what are we going to do? We'll perform antisocial behaviors, right? That was Diener's theory in 1980. And lastly, this has been the theory that's carried on mostly in computing. It's called the SIDE theory, the social identity model of de-individuation effects. Short, just let's call it SIDE. It sounds better, right? Put that theory on a side. There's 2 major parts of this. There's a cognitive component and there's a strategic component. Strategic component meaning that I want to use anonymity for a sole purpose of doing something, right? I choose to be anonymous when I'm chatting with my ex-girlfriend, okay? That's not true, by the way. I'm just giving you an example, all right? The cognitive component is different. The cognitive component basically states that you have this thing called social, part of being a group, it's called group dynamics. Hold on, what is it called? Group, it was by Turner. I forgot the exact term. But group association, okay? When you associate yourself with a group, that might actually change your view on how you view yourself as anonymous or not anonymous. So those are the 2 major parts of the SIDE theory. So how many theories did we see right now? 5? 4? Enough, right? So what do we see? We see many theories, right? Some of them are general, some are more specific. The SIDE is general, but it focuses mostly on the situation you're placed in. So which ones can we apply to computing? Who knows the answer? You can pretty much apply all of them to computing, right? Now, here's the thing. I don't want to say that no research has been done in these theories while relating them to computing. They have been researched, but in the sense of computer communication. If I send you an email, is that considered a crime? No, right? So that's my point. All this research has been done in CMC. And we are in the e-age right now. There's e-voting, e-payments, ETC. I thought that would be funny, but no one got that. All right? And someone stated the equalization hypothesis also. All right? I'm glad someone smiled. All right. Someone stated that there's this other theory that they call the equalization hypotheses. And it means that individuals with less powers in society are more likely to say things out online, right? So you can tell your boss that you hate them if you're anonymous online by saying, I hate you, boss, right? That's the equalization hypotheses. I wish I had a clicker. One of the things that people usually say is that there's no obvious way of relating the sending of a message to a user's real identity. That's kind of fake. Look at that email. joe@google.co.uk. What do we know about that person from that email? He's what? Joe is what? What's his gender? Male. He works where? Google, in that scenario. Okay, I just came up with a fictitious email, by the way. And it's based out of the UK, right? So we know these three things. IPs are traceable. You can trace IPs to their source. Okay? Technology contains personal information. Right? Look at your cell phone. It contains probably a lot of things that you don't want people to know. One can use any of the anonymity-related theories, which is what we just talked about, to explain anonymity in computing. Okay? So we can apply all those theories to the computing world. Come on. So what? Right? The body of knowledge relating to anonymity and de-individuation is focused on what? Computer communications. Is it focused on computer crime? No. There's no focus on deviant behaviors. Cybercrime is associated with antisocial behaviors and deviant behaviors. Therefore, what we get out of this is anonymity theories need to be tested in the cybercrime field. Right? Do you see where I'm going with this? Hopefully you do. Is it a problem? Yes. These are some staggering statistics. I don't have to read them out to you. Just have a look, be staggered. Okay? Why cybercrime? So why are people using cybercrime as means of attacking things? Well, it's efficient. And it's cheap. In fact, in countries where there used to be organized crime, now there's organized cybercrime. Okay? There are people that are in charge of credit card thefts. There are groups that are in charge of fraud. There are groups that are in charge of all these different kinds of thefts that you can think about. And they all work together under one major group. And they make enough money. I don't want to mention any countries. Look that up. Go to Google and type that up. The second big thing is there are problems associated with laws that deal with cybercrimes. It's not the cybercrime definition under law is not very clear. So some people might get away with things. Like the person that did the I love you virus in the Philippines. It took a while to take that back to the Philippines, but then there were no cyber laws in the Philippines. That's a problem. So, the two major types of crimes that I want to talk about are high-tech, white-collar crimes and IT insider threat, because those are the most prevalent ones. High-tech, white-collar crime, or white-collar crime in general, is a very old crime. It's not new. It's developed over the years. In fact, the definition changed because it used to be a crime committed by a person of respectably and high social status. But now, anyone can commit white-collar crime. It's different. You don't have to be in high social status. And there are also debates on the definition of what white-collar crime is. If you go to the NW3C website, there's a paper that deals with that. You can go and have a look at that. Impact, you can look at these statistics as well. The problem is white-collar crime is changing from being normal or crime that does not deal with computing into mostly dealing with computing. Okay? And who's committing those crimes? People. Exactly. White-collar people. Insider threat. It's an actual problem that you can trace back to 544 BC. There's two basic kinds. There's sabotage and espionage. It's kind of interesting where people come in and they're like, hey, check this out. Insider threat in IT is a big deal. But you know what? Insider threats existed for so many years. Have we done much about it? Not really. We need to do more about it, especially in computing environments. Because statistics say that 80% of crimes almost that happen in the technology world deal with insider crime. Yes? Yes, probably. Did I mess that up? Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. But there have been studies from a psychological perspective on the concept of insider threat. And the studies indicate that there are preconditions for a person to engage in insider threat. There has to be an opportunity for that to happen. There has to be a motive, and it's usually a motive that is deeper than just money. Okay? There should be an ability to overcome natural inhibitions for doing something bad, and a trigger. Like if you're really, really pissed off about something at your job and someone just pissed you off right there and then, that triggered you to go ahead and do some kind of insider threat activity. Those are usually the preconditions according to research that's done. Impact, check it out. All right? These statistics mean something. Is it bad? Yes, it's bad. Are we taking care of it properly? No, because we're spending too much time doing research on authentication, authorization, access control, firewalls, and so on and so forth. Are we spending enough time understanding the people? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure. So why do people misuse computers? Well, there's two major old theories. There's choice theory and there's rational choice theory. Rational choice theory is basically, choice theory is like humans choose to perform a crime. Rational choice theory is if I'm looking at doing something bad, I want to outweigh, if I'm going to do something bad, will I get away with it? And if I get, how easy it is to get away with it. Okay? Those are the things that you look at when you're looking at rational choice theory. The point is, researchers in our field, and I have talked to them on several occasions, they say that the chance of being caught may be diminished because you perceive yourself to be more anonymous when you are behind a computer screen. Everyone that you talk to will say this almost. And here's my pitch. Show me the proof. I have contacted researchers that have published in this field, and they make that claim, and I tell them to send me studies to show me that this is exactly what's happening. And they're not doing that. I can't make a claim as a scientist and expect it to go out and, yeah, here you go. This is true. Show me the proof. Do a study that shows you this. It's not being done. We need to do this, especially if we are STEM students, because we understand computing and we know what's happening with a computer. So we need to start understanding the human behavior as well, specifically in the case of anonymity and insider threat. So what next? Well, let's take all the de-individuation theories, let's apply them to computing, let's create studies to test those theories in computing environments, but not only in computing environments, in deviant computing environments. Okay? In computing environments that you know that there's cybercrime happening. You want to test them in cybercrime settings. You don't just want to test them when I'm sending you an email and you're sending me an email. Because our purpose is to figure out why cybercrime is happening. So, conclusions. Hopefully you got out of my talk that humans are the problem at the end of the day. Okay? It's not the encryption algorithm you're using. It's not the decryption algorithm you're using. It could be. You could help mitigate things in that area, but we're always going to find a way to go around that. Okay? Mostly, people in the STEM area, in the science, computer technology areas, they forget that there's such a thing as a human, an individual. They focus all their research mostly on what? On code, on computers, on hardware, on networks, on wireless networks, on wired networks. Is that all we should be doing? No. How does that impact humans? The bigger problem is the individuation theories change. The meaning of anonymity changed. All these things are happening and we're still behind because we don't fully understand how anonymity is affecting cybercrime. And I'm only giving you two examples, the IT insider threat and high-tech white-collar crimes, because these seem to be the most prevalent types of cybercrime that are happening. Come on. Are there any questions? Feel free to ask anything you want. Not anything that relates to this. Yes.
How do you
Push that thing there.
How do you remove the human element in creating safe computer networks?
You can't. Can you? Who thinks you can? I don't think you can. Because even if computers become automated with artificial intelligence, at the end of the day, there's a person that created that artificial intelligence. That is what I'm trying to explain here. Any other questions? Who found this interesting outside the scope of what they're doing? Okay. Who thinks that we really should start doing stuff like this? Why? Who can materialize what they experienced? Yes.
well, anyone who
Push that thing so you can be heard.
Well,
Yes.
pretty sure anyone who's ever visited any type of forum regularly online will tell you that people are a lot more bold on forums because they think they're anonymous on
Yeah.
those forums, even though moderators and such can check their IP. And especially in the case of what has been labeled trolls, you have people who will create several accounts thinking that no one knows that all 5 of those accounts are the same person.
Yeah.
But in reality, they do have their IP tagging all 5 of those as the same person who's just trying to cause trouble.
And you understand this why? Because you know technology, right?
Because I moderate a forum.
There you go. But you understand technology a little better than the average user.
Mm-hmm.
That's also another factor that we should look at. Yes.
How would you propose conducting research into how to differentiate who's going to be a cyber criminal and who isn't?
Okay. There is already research done by Dr. Rogers on this, and it's on cybercrime criminal profiling. So there is research that's being done on that in that area. So, but I think what we should do is take these theories that existed on normal crime and see if they apply to cybercrime or not. Because we can't just simply assume that they do. We need to test that. As scientists, as people, as an academic, as an academic, we need to test that. I'm not going to stand in front of you and tell you this is what's happening if I don't know if that's what's happening or not. I need to test that. I need to put that into action. Any other questions? Yes.
So you're motivating this topic, but what other research has been, or what are you currently working on specifically?
I'm working on this.
But I mean, what kind of data are you looking at, or what? I mean,
I'm actually
specific research questions.
Okay. I'm looking at how anonymity and personal integrity affects a person, or whether or not that will, based on those variables, whether or not that person will be more willing or less willing to engage in cybercriminal activities. Does that make any sense? Yes. Push that.
This seems more of like a psychology type research. And
Yes.
In psychology, it's hard to do kind of scientific method. It's more of
That is absolutely not true.
I mean, you can't know what someone's thinking for 100% sure. You can make assumptions.
I agree with you on the
You can ask them to fill out a form after they get arrested. You can try to come up with different. But at the end of the day, you have no real facts.
Okay.
And there's no scientific. How do you? Give me one example of an experiment that you can have hard proof, hard scientific fact of how someone was thinking at a certain time when they were maybe doing a crime.
Okay. Here's the thing. First of all, you made a false assumption in saying you're not using a scientific method. Because here's something that psychology people do. Since it is a social science, let me continue. Since it is a social science, and they understand that people that have a very natural scientific background on the topic, they are actually using very, very scientific techniques to get their data. What's the scientific method? just to put that out there, you have a hypothesis and you test the hypothesis and you get results, right? Now, I'm with you on the fact that this is not going to work 100% of the time. But knowing that something is going to work at least sometimes is better than knowing that than knowing nothing about it. That's my whole point.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes.
There is a probability of failure and success. You can't just be 100% sure this is scientific method. It's like a trial and error analysis.
So authorship attribution is not scientific?
No, we're talking about this.
Well, I'm giving you an example. What is authorship attribution? You look at two different documents, right? And there's a probability that this document is, you know who the author is, and the probability that the author is not. Okay? The scientific method does not dictate that something is going to happen 100% of the time.
No, the point is to prove that something is, to framework something, you have to prove it either scientifically, either mathematically, or either experimentally.
Yes.
So you have three fields, and it's proved. Like if three of them agree on this, then you can go with one approach. So you know that it's going to always succeed or always fail. You know what I mean?
Well,
This probability of success and failure does not fall under this umbrella. You know what I mean?
under this umbrella, like under information assurance, is it?
It's like we're talking about what I'm doing, like anonymity with cyber forensics or with cyber crime is the scientific, it's scientifically proven.
So
I'm just commenting on this
well,
point.
okay. But I am saying that the scientific method, in essence, does not mean that something is going to work 100% of the time. Okay? The scientific method is based on guessing that something is going to more likely happen. That is what the scientific method is. If you want to go back to the origination of the scientific method, to the time when it originated with Charles Bacon, okay? If you look at his theory of the scientific method, and if you want me to get into details about this, I will. The point is, the scientific method was basically, I'm going to observe something over and over again until something happens. When Kepler's laws of planetary motion came about, and that's physics, which is more of a natural science, what happened then? Basically, ingenuity, okay, which is imagination, was the key factor in him figuring out what the laws of planetary motion were. It was not a hard fact. It was him imagining something and then proving to himself that that's what happened. You, well, I'm not disagreeing with you. I have not disagreed with you that it's a guess or not.
He just said he made a false assumption. I don't think so.
No, he used ingenuity. Okay? He used imagination. He's like, I think I believe, in my head that that's what it is. And it came out to be true after it got tested. Okay? What you guys are talking about is doing an experiment over and over and over again. Okay? Which is external validity. Okay? When you do something over and over and over again, and different people perform that, then if you get the same results over and over again, then you can try to say, yeah, it's more likely that this method is working. Yes?
What I think you guys are mostly arguing is the difference between theory and law, and the difference between mathematical and hard sciences, and sciences that involve human beings. Anything involving human beings, well, almost anything involving human beings, you're never going to get 100%, because there are always going to be that at least fraction of a percent where there's the exception of people. And then also, when you go ahead and you do enough tests, and you generally see a trend with people, and that's why if you look into most of the social sciences, and also in medicine, because even in medicine things aren't 100%, you have theories, unlike in other sciences where you have laws, because it is true, you can't prove 100% something with people,
Yeah.
but you can see trends from that research.
But my argument also remains that even in the computer science field, okay, and this is something to take to heart, things don't work 100% of the time right. Okay? Have you ever gone to a computer lab and the system was down? Yes? Was it working at that point in time? No. So you can't preach that this is 100% true. In fact, in physics, what happened in physics as a subject? Newton did all his laws, all these classical theories happened, and then what happened? All these theories were disproven, even though we still teach them in universities today. Because it turned out that the classical mechanics is not 100% right. And it turned out that you have to look at things at a smaller scale. You have to look at atoms, or you have to look at the smaller particles in order to get your answer to be right. Yes?
I'm going to switch topics a little bit here and get back on topic, I think.
How much time do we have left?
I have no idea.
So we have 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay.
My question is because this is an antisocial behavior cybercrime, how would you, in theory, look for it? How would you test for it in a laboratory setting if you're shining a light on it, so to speak? Is it kind of like knowing a particle's speed or a particle's energy level kind of thing?
Well, it comes down to one of two things, right? You can either do behavioral analysis, so you can look at someone's behavior, or you can do surveys. Because a survey is an instrument that's widely used, and if it's validated over time, you can kind of get close to getting a decent result with it. And there's one survey, to my knowledge, that I've seen that does that. I don't know about any other very good ones that have been validated, but I know there's one because I'm using it. Yes?
For some of these other, for some of the previous research in the area, what have they done to go ahead and how have they performed some of their research to go ahead and identify the antisocial behavior in
really,
groups?
what's happening is you have to start looking at antisocial behaviors in a new sense. You can't just, because what's antisocial behavior? It was regarded as someone drinking a lot or someone doing a lot of drugs. I mean, that's one example of it. And in fact, if you look at the surveys, they ask you those questions. But if you're looking at antisocial behaviors online, those are a little different. Okay, one of them could be child pornography, right? One of them could be misusing someone's name, identity. There's so many different ways of doing that online. And what you need to do is measure those things in order to get closer to what antisocial behavioral tendencies are online. So the definition is kind of changing slightly, right? That's my whole point. Is you can't just give someone a survey on are you doing drugs? And they might be correlated, actually. You don't know that, right? We have to test that. So I'm not going to make the assumption that they're not correlated, because they might be correlated.
That's the whole point, though. So the surveys might be correlated, might not be, but there's no way to prove it. So with drugs, you can prove it by, let's test the drug in this person. Does it actually have a bad, effect?
But it might affect you differently than him, differently than him, differently than him, differently than him. Not necessarily. You might be able to do behavior also. So it depends on your experimental design. You can ask a survey, you can validate the survey with behavioral analysis. That is possible. Okay? And in fact, there's a system that was developed using the old methods like EEG, in which they are able to almost accurately predict what task you are thinking about. Go online and Google the guy that, have you seen the Wii Remote implementation that the Asian researcher did? It's the same guy. He has a paper published on that, and you can have a look at that. And they used a very cheap EEG, which is $1,500, it cost them $1,500 or so, and they were able to almost accurately predict the thought process of that person. It measures the voltage of your, how, I don't know how EEG works exactly, but it's it takes the small voltage that your brain emits while it's thinking, and it's looking at patterns in that. It's reading the signals that your mind is emitting, and therefore associating those patterns with the task that you're doing. Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to know, you talked about anonymity. What are the researches happening? What are the other researches, and what trends are you looking at? Is it heading the right way?
I don't think so. I mean, I personally, from the literature that I've read and the literature that I've had to do for my dissertation, it's not heading the right way, no. It's just, it's basically people in our field are assuming that these old theories are going to immediately apply to computing. And my point is we can't make that assumption. We can't make that leap. We have to absolutely test those things. We can't just make that leap because definitions are changing, as I showed you. Not only definitions are changing, but models are changing. The way we perceive anonymity is changing. It's also different from one culture to another culture. So we have to test those things. We have to verify that. So I hope at least you got something out of this. Like, humans should be studied in this field. I really want people in computer sciences and computer technology to start thinking about this. My background is in computer science, computer technology, telecom. But A, this is interesting. And B, it's important. Yes? It's telecommunications engineering technology. Or network engineering technology, sorry. Yes, it's under the CNIT department. But they have some interesting classes.
So the classes would be under CNIT, like looking up.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
One last question.
Yep.
Just want to ask, how do you drive your analysis? Do you go for observations, do surveys, or do you have
Well, right now, I haven't, I'm basically, this presentation is about what could be done, okay? So I haven't done any formal research, but I did get my RB approval almost done so that I can go ahead and perform my research. But the easiest way to do that at this point is surveys, okay? That's the easiest way to do that. There are surveys that measure certain things, and you need to correlate all of those together and form a model. And based on that model, you can keep testing it in other ways as well. So you don't necessarily only have to look at surveys, but behavior becomes difficult to look at in an experimental setting. You don't want something like the Stanford prison experiment happening all over again, like in the computer world, because that will create a lot of issues. The Stanford prison experiment, that's an interesting experiment. Read up on it. Yeah. Any other questions? Are we done? 2, 1? I think we're almost done. Good questions. I want more if there's more, because it keeps me thinking. It really does.
if you want to talk, you can explain the Stanford experiment.
I think I'll leave that to Chris. He that's his major area.
In the late 50s, took 20 grad students and locked them in the basement of a dormitory. And half of them were prisoners and half of them were guards. And the only thing that differentiated them was the guards were given sunglasses and sticks. And in under a week, they evolved into a prison society where force won out over everything. It's about the results of the study showed that authoritarianism is inherent in human society, and that given the right opportunity, the strong it'll come back, and the strong will take over. Yada yada.
So even the prisoners became like society.
Well, it became that the guards started beating the prisoners.
So the guards were strong, like physically stronger.
No, but they were given the role of the authoritarian by the stick and the sunglasses so that you couldn't see their eyes. And under a week, the roles were assimilated into the individuals. And then they reversed the roles the next week. And it was anarchy, actually, because the prisoners then took it out on their former captors.
This seems a little skeptical.
Read up on it. It's really interesting. And he's almost thrown out of the academic community for it because it's really unethical to do.
And that's shut down the experiment. They didn't think it's going to be able to That's what I heard.
I don't remember exactly. And then there's also another one where he pretended to shock people and see how much voltage people would administer to each other.
See, there's a certain level of difficulty that's associated when doing research that deals with sensitive matters like this. Okay, you can't put you can put a human being into a situation where they might do something like cheat on a question That's not that difficult to do. But to make that leap from cheating on a question to like hacking a network is a little difficult. So we need some way of doing that. And we can't get to that unless we start thinking about this stuff, unless we get our minds working. And that's the whole point of this, is we should start thinking about this. If you really like computers, that's great. But people are using those computers. People are using the software that you're developing. And anonymity seems to be something that we should really look into, especially when you're discussing insider threat. Yes?
What kind of
Push.
angle would this go?
Yeah.
What kind of end goal would this kind of research have? Would it be creating networks that automatically defend themselves from after a certain amount of interaction with it, that it can figure
Well,
out who you are?
it could lead
or-
a lot of, I mean, one of the things that you could definitely do as a company is if you're hiring someone, you can tell whether that person might perform some kind of insider threat that's related to computing or not. Especially if you're a company like Microsoft, or if you're a company like Google. If you're a big company and you have a lot of coders, you have people that code a lot, you have people that are very tech oriented, how can you differentiate between, you know, those kinds of people and the others? That's one example where that could be applied.
Yeah, some companies with their network administrators, any type of admins, when they have multiple administrators, rather than having one admin user that they can log in as, each one has their own username, so that any admin.
And each one has a password that's like God or something. Also,
They each have to do their admin duties under their own name.
the thing is, research has been done on hackers, but the average Joe like in this day and age, can do like an auctioning scam online. So it's different. We're becoming an e-age, you know, ETC e-age. So we really need to think this through very well. Any other questions? Should we close this up? Thank you. This was fun.